Hey drummers, I'm Brad Schlueter. In this video I want to take one groove and adapt it in a dozen different ways. Now this groove is very adaptable, partly because it has such a funky kick and snare pattern. We'll begin by working the pattern up slowly, one chunk at a time, until we're playing the whole thing. Great, now let's work it up to faster tempos. If you're new here, I create drum videos on a wide range of topics. If that's something you're interested in, please consider subscribing. So far, we've been using just 3 limbs to play this pattern. Let's work our left foot into the pattern as well. For this, I'm going to play 8th notes on the hi-hat. Another way to use the hi-hat is to do a heel-toe splash, which will emphasize all the quarter notes of the pattern. This is a little bit harder, so if you haven't done it before, take your time. Now let's vary the tom melody. I'm going to move my right hand down the toms in the middle of the pattern. Now let's try another tom melody. Even though the sticking is exactly the same, simply varying when I hit the toms makes it sound like a completely different pattern, at least to my ears. Adapting a pattern you already know how to play in a bunch of different ways is a great way to expand your creativity, and it's also a really great way to really deeply ingrain the pattern into your muscle memory. At this point, you're probably wondering, what would it sound like if we played our right hand on the hi-hat? One reason this groove is so adaptable is because the kick and snare drum note are playing a funky common groove. Let's try and add some tom notes to this hi-hat based pattern. Another option we have is to open and close our hi-hat while we're playing this basic groove. For this one, I'm going to open the hi-hat on the and of 1 and the E of 2. Okay, now let's try and imply a polymeter with our hi-hat openings. Because there are hi-hats that fall roughly every 3rd 16th note, if we open our hi-hat on all of those, it creates this cool, funky, polymetric implied pattern. Did you hear how that sounded kind of polyrhythmic? Let's go back to our simpler hi-hat version where I just open it in 2 places and add some tom notes to that. If you're a right-handed drummer, you may never play hi-hat with your left hand unless you're doing a 2-handed hi-hat groove. But one of the best ways to develop your weaker hand is to get used to playing at least simple grooves with your left hand on the hi-hat. I do this often, so I'm going to try and play this groove up to tempo with my left hand on the hi-hat. While I was playing this pattern left-handed, it occurred to me that I could try and work in some of those tom fills. Now this is definitely going to be awkward because I'm a right-handed player, primarily. So to work this up, I have to go really slow, and I'll demonstrate that process for you now. Okay, once I get that idea down, I try to do it faster and faster and faster, and I'll spare you all that. But what I wanted to do was see if I could shift between playing the groove right-handed and left-handed. This is more of a mental task than it is a physical task. There are some physical aspects involved, but as long as I'm comfortable with each half of the groove, the mental shift is really the more challenging part of it. Here's that up to tempo. I know I said earlier we'd work up about a dozen patterns, but I've got a few bonus patterns for you. What I want to do now is play a brush with my right hand and a stick with my left hand, playing a RIMCLICK. This creates a totally different sounding sort of groove. At slow tempos, this is like a cool ballad groove. And at slightly brighter tempos, it's kind of like a cool, funky groove with an interesting texture. Check it out. I think that last groove was pretty cool, but if that bass drum pattern was a little too funky or maybe a little too loud, one way we can lighten it up is to take a couple of those bass drum notes and move them over to the hi-hat where we play them by pedaling the hi-hat. I'm going to take the 2 individual kick drum notes that are sort of by themselves and move them over here. Now let's work it up to faster tempos. Let me lighten that idea up a little bit more by taking one of the double kick drum notes and moving that one to the hi-hat. Now for an even lighter version, I'm going to leave the first and the last kick drum note on the bass drum, but put all the other ones on the hi-hat. I think this one sounds really cool. Now, if I hadn't told you, you might not have realized that all these grooves are based on one idea. And that's kind of the interesting thing and the cool thing about really diving into one and try and stretch it as many ways as you can. Now, there are a lot more other ways I could have stretched it, but this is plenty for one video. One of the best things about taking a groove and expanding in a bunch of different ways is it's great for your creativity as well as your coordination. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'd appreciate it. And if you have a favorite groove amongst these, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to know what it was. Thanks for watching.